Liberia is often cited as having had Africa's first elected woman head of state in Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Yet the structural place of women, like you alluded to a few minutes ago, especially young women in political and economic life, tells a different story. How do you read that gap? And what does an honest account of gender and power in Liberia today need to include that the celebratory narrative leaves out?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yes, Liberia is often touted as a country of many firsts. So, yes, first woman elected head of state. Liberia also can tout the fact that it had the first African woman president of the UN General Assembly in terms of Angie Brooks Randall. I found out recently, reading an academic article about her, that she was very, very much in support of anti colonial struggles in Southern Africa, particularly around Namibia. That I didn't know, right? And then Liberia had the first woman vice president in West Africa in terms of Jewel Howard Taylor. However, as you kind of alluded to, these women are very much exceptions, right? These are exceptional stories of women who've defied domestic as well as global patriarchal norms. They're actually not the norm in Liberia. The vast majority of women and girls in Liberia are structurally poor, and I'm sure Hawa will speak to that a little bit later. They have no access to capital or very limited access to capital. They have a high care burden in terms of taking care of children, elderly, so forth and so on. And they are also politically stifled. So if you look at the political kind of compromises in Liberia now, if you look at the political structures in Liberia right now, women participate in the political discourse, but in a very limited fashion. Women represent other women and men in the political kind of sphere, but at a very limited level. So if you look at the 55th legislature, it only comprises 11% of women in the legislature at the moment. This is a very abysmal kind of figure, given the historical trajectory of Liberia as this kind of bastion of kind of feminist practices, given that we have all these women who've really risen to the occasion in their spheres of influence. There's also a current electoral law that's very tokenistic. So the electoral law effectively states that political parties should endeavor to ensure that they have 30% representation in terms of their candidacy roster from one election to another. Very few political parties have met that 30% threshold because there are no consequences for not doing so. That particular suggestion is not enforced in the particular law, right? And so I think what we need to think about is, how does Liberia institute some sort of feminist reckoning, right? How do we ensure that forms of gendered inequalities are fundamentally unacceptable? How do we ensure that these gendered inequalities are tackled, that are addressed head on? And I think one of the ways of doing that is to have a complete kind of reordering of politics, a complete reordering of economics, to change the structural inequalities and the structural positioning of women and girls in Liberia.
Thank you, Thank you, Raptel. Thank you so much. We have a lot to discuss, and thank you for the part you played there. You heard it, listeners, that Raptel has set the frame for us, the questions of belonging and where the nation is heading. But the nation is also built on the ground, in the classrooms, in the neighborhoods. Howard C. Wilson does exactly that work in Monrovia. Howard, we're going to trying to focus on you right now so that you can talk to us a little bit. For viewers just meeting your work for the first time today, can you tell us what the Paramount Young Women Initiative is, and what brought you into that work?
Okay, so thank you again for having me on this platform. Paramount Young Women Initiative started because I have listened keenly to Raptor as we go along. The thought of belongings and local or national ownership brought forth into existence the Paramount Young Women Initiative right after the war, 2003, when schools resumed. This group of young women thought to put themselves together because the issue around education, the issue around support, most especially to young women and adolescent girls, were on a very high increase, where there were very limited support for women and girls to be able to access education. So as a result, those young women at that time on AMEU thought it wise to bring together the Paramount Young Women Initiative with a key focus on advancing gender equality, advocating for women's rights in terms of protection as well, and also empowering young women and girls through advocacy leadership development, education, social reproductive health and rights, and WASH programming, followed by sexual and gender-based violence related issues within the communities. But then what actually brought me into this space as a young woman, growing up and working within communities across Liberia, I have witnessed so many violence, not once. But then I thought to ask myself, what can I do and how can I contribute to addressing these issues? And then coming from a family where my grandfather and grandmother have approximately 12 children, and out of those 12, 7 were females who did not have access to go to school, sit in a classroom, and watching the level of domestic violence being played on their husbands. Probably they did not have the economic support, they did not have the voice to speak out. So all of those issues, then I thought it was and said, look, I'm not going to be one of those victims, but I rather participate in the process to contribute to making change in my community. And that's how I got involved into this journey.
Thank you so much, Howard. One of the things that's really struck me about the work that you're doing in approach to gender-based violence is the male engagement piece, particularly the work in places like Samoka Camp. Many organizations focus on supporting survivors, which is essential, but your organization does that and it goes even further. Why is it important to you to bring men and boys into conversation, and what have you learned doing that work right in practice in Monrovia?
Yeah, so most often in Liberia, being a highly social and highly social negative gender norms communities, the issue of gender-based violence has been cataloged in a form where women are supposed to do this, women are entitled to do this, and all of that. But then the society has failed to realize and understand that gender-based violence is not a woman issue. It's an issue of the entire community that concerns both gender that we have in our society. So that's what prompted the male engagement in our institution, coordinate enough of those excuses, because when you go to the community, there are numerous excuses why men are not seated in the room with women, because of cultural and traditional beliefs, social affiliation, and all of that. So we coined that project enough of those excuses to be able to engage more men. And I tell you, based upon the engagement across 4 to 6 communities, bringing 60 men together per communities. And then we got to realize that most of these things were ongoing in our community or are ongoing due to limited knowledge and understanding on both on gender roles within the homes, because men will tell you that I'm the man, I'm not supposed to show my salary to my wife, imagine that, or my girlfriend. And a man will come home looking at the home choices that lady have to take responsibility of on a daily basis. I remember one of the cases we had, this lady got brutally beaten by her husband only because she was tired at night to have sex. So all of this information fed more deeper into the work, into this identical project. So after the engagement today, I can safely say to you that one is because of limited knowledge and understanding on the ways both parties should be able to handle and respect each other. And as a result of this new trainings we had in through back to back, today we have a community where most especially those communities we work in, and most of our participants, right? I gave you this story, keep coming back to me. The very first day we got in the community, and I remember this community chairman, he looked at my face, what smart girl are you? And what are you going to tell me? I hope you didn't come with this, your lesbian and gay issue. And then we will go further to talk about the different backlashes that we receive in the community as activists. So I'm like, no, we are here to talk about our roles and responsibility collectively in the community, what is expected of a male, what is expected of a female, and how we can join hands together to ensure our community gets improved. That identical fellow who asked that question today has stood up to be one of the male champions. He's in the community as an active bystander, reporting rape cases, abuse cases, and all of those other issues that affect women and girls. He's always the first to pick up form because we have our reporting channels. He's always the first. So that thing, because of limited knowledge and understanding, coupled with those rigid social norms are reasons why most often we complain and have issues around our sexual gender-based violence issue, but the male engagement is actually on very good footing. And since that engagement, now we have seen numerous engagement at the national level where they have had a masculinity conference, where there are other CSO now joining and working collectively to ensure that more men are educated and informed on the different gender constructs and to see how well we all can work collectively to address them.
Thank you so much, Hawa, and I applaud the work you're doing down there. Thank you. I'll come to you there, but there's a question of legality that came to my mind. I want to throw that question onto Dr. Levitt here. I know he's a distinguished international lawyer here. I think it was in 2023, the U.S. government, the Treasury's designated perpetrators of human rights abuses in Liberia. And among them, Dr. Levitt, was the former city mayor of Monrovia. His name is Jefferson Koji. Dr. Levitt, walk us through how these individuals can still be held accountable and face the full weight of the law, even though they are living in Liberia. If you are talking, Dr. Levitt, I think you are on mute.
Yeah.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
This is such an important question because I don't know of another country where 70% of the women suffered from sexual gender-based violence on the planet. And I think the global response to it has been poor because we saw the response to women victims in the former Yugoslavia. I do think, and I was appointed by Ellen to be the international technical advisor over the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and some of the things that we talked about today, I was directly involved with drafting those. I think one of the great failures of her administration was not addressing this issue. She was symbolic in so many ways, which was empowering, not unlike at the same period of time Barack Obama was symbolic and empowering in some ways. But when it came to the practical realities of holding persons accountable for crimes during the various episodes of civil conflict, I think the government failed. I think the government failed women in particular, because all of the perpetrators that were involved with committing crimes between 1990 and 2003, women had to live among them in their own community, see them on the street. And this is why we wanted a prosecutorial mechanism. This is why we were fighting to hold individuals responsible for such crimes. So I think the lack of accountability in Liberia has only perpetuated this problem and made it worse in the long run. I remember a case when I was with ECOWAS in the early 90s, doing work in Liberia, and again with the Carter Center. I was working with Tiwan Gonglo, who was Solicitor General at the time, and there was a Minister of Justice. And I'll share two anecdotes that I think paint the picture. The one is that at the time there was a female Minister of Justice. I won't mention her name. And there was a question about the rape law, the marital rape statute at the time. And she says, there were cases that came before us. My job was to advise her and T1 on issues. And she said, well, we can't prosecute for marital rape in Liberia. And I said, Minister, this is not correct. I said, you can. And I said, you're also a signatory of these various human rights conventions that say that you must. And I went into some detailed analysis on how she was misinterpreting the marital rape statute and how she was misinterpreting how human rights law was applicable to Liberia, meaning that Liberia signed these treaties without reservation. So we used those things to make a broader argument, and she changed her position and began prosecuting some of these cases. Then there was a case I remember where a woman who was in an area outside of Monrovia, who lived alone in her house, had a very expansive yard, as we call it here, land. And one day the grass was cut, and the community members, the young boys, said there's no way that this old woman could cut the grass. The only way that she could do it is if she was a witch. So they abducted her and gave her the trial by Sassywood, but she survived it. And then they said only a witch. So essentially, if you take it and you survive, then you're innocent. If you die, then you're guilty. Well, she survived it and said only a witch could survive it, and they killed her. And so the question was how we were going to then prosecute these young men for murdering this woman. So at a deeply cultural level, there is a sense of violence. It is embedded, like in most cultures around the world, but it is particularly embedded there because it's been allowed to persist, even when there was an opportunity to really create the legislation and laws and the infrastructure to prosecute these types of crimes. And so the anchor for Liberia is women. And if you don't empower the women, if you don't protect the women, if you don't allow the women to have an equal opportunity from the boardrooms on down, then Liberia will continue to suffer from underdevelopment. I don't think the issue has been taken seriously. And I think successive presidents have dropped the ball on this question. I think the impunity in Liberia is one of the root causes of the continued sexual gender-based violence there. And until a government is willing to prosecute individuals seriously and go back to the Civil War, some don't want to open that. I think you have to open it up. I think the highest level offenders who created a culture of rape and sexual violence who are still living should be prosecuted. And so I think we have an entire problem, and I don't think the international community is assisting, and I don't think the politicians have demonstrated the rigor to really address this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Levitt there. So question of accountability is taking so long in Liberia. And I'm going to be talking about the war crimes code that Raptel alluded to here earlier, but I'll still go back to Howard. You earlier this year, you publicly challenged Representative Siebel over the exclusion of young women from international scholarship opportunities. A representative, excluding women from international scholarship. I'm repeating that because I found that to be very offensive. Talk us through that moment, Howard.
Okay, so just like Evan said, the issue of accountability, and for me, that's where I came from to even speak out or speak against his comment. Because stakeholders, most especially the legislators, those who make policies and laws in Liberia, the issues around accountability is a very, very, very huge, serious challenge. That process, we have been implementing this project for a while now, and as part of the national policy on girls' education, policy calls for 5% allotment of the national budget of the Ministry of Education to be allotted directly to girls' education. However, since the policy came into existence, there hasn't been a single government to make that allotment available. And then we also start to engage the Ministry of Education through the legislature, the Joint Education Committee, to see, because we have observed and we know that there are international opportunities that come in, but then they get stuck along the way. Probably it has been posted 1 week to the expiration date, and it's also been posted probably 2 days to the expiration date. So we thought as advocates to also engage them to see how well we could be able to solicit and lobby on some seats that women could also be able to go on. Probably at that meeting, he was in a park. But then
I think we have lost Howard there. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so probably at that meeting, he was in a park, and then he thought to go and speak at some event. That was how he made that pronouncement that women should not be a beneficiary of international scholarship, because most often when they go to those countries to learn and acquire education, they don't. But rather, they get pregnant, drop off the school, and probably marry and still there for greener pasture. So my point was, if the system was working, there wouldn't even be many Liberian women pushing out for scholarships. So what are you doing as a lawmaker to ensure that just at the primary and secondary level, the 5% allotted by the national policy provision by the national policy on girls' education has been provided for women and girls? And how are you setting in your position as lawmaker to ensure that women and girls have access, whether it's justice, whether it's education, whether it's health? And I think that statement by him already triggered a lot of conversation around in Liberia, which of course was not right, because I also said instances that there are numerous women, Liberian women and girls that left, went out for scholarship and they studied, they came back and they are contributing. Even I, Hawa, who sits as the acting executive director of Paramount, I also benefited from the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program. So having I gone to the US to gain that level of education to enhance my already skills that I had, I wouldn't be more versatile in doing what I'm doing today. So saying to us that young women and girls should not benefit from international scholarship, I think it was just a mere conversation or mere talk that he was using to slant out of the conversation of not being accountable and not shouldering his responsibility in terms of the full allotment that we were requesting for women and girls as it relates to education.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much.